Hi, I'm Tom, and in this video I want to talk about the coldest room in our house, our bathroom. Whilst we're very happy with how our bathroom looks, we're not particularly happy about how cold it actually gets. Now, I've learned a lot about heating and plumbing since we had our bathroom renovated a few years ago, so I thought it might be useful to share the decision-making process we followed at the time, the mistakes I realised that we made, and how I plan to fix them in the future. Back in 2021, we moved the family from London to the Midlands to be closer to family. We bought a new house that needed complete renovation, and we decided that the bathroom would be the very first room that we renovated. We already had a plumber putting in a brand new heating system, and when we asked him about the bathroom radiator, he simply said, go online, pick one out and we'll plumb it in for you. So let's start by taking a look at how I decided what radiator we were going to get. Now, at the time, I was a complete heating novice and I knew nothing about radiators. So I just used one of these standard BTU calculators that you can find on almost every website that sells radiators. This isn't the exact one I would have used back then, but they're all pretty similar, so this will serve as a good example. I filled out all the details, the width, the height, the length, the amount of area in the room. I chose what type of room it was, a bathroom. I chose what the floor was made out of, what the roof space was, it had insulation, what the walls were made out of, what the type of windows were, and finally the number of external walls. And when I ran the simple calculator, I got a figure of 5,000 BTUs. Now, BTUs aren't something I use. Everything I've learned about heating over the past couple of years has always been discussed in watts, but thankfully this calculator does give us a figure in watts, and it's 1,473, so I'm going to refer to that as 1.5 kilowatts. This is the heat demand that the room needs, so we would need to pick a radiator that outputs at least 1,500 watts. As we were also planning to tile the bathroom, I wanted to get some electric underfloor heating in there as well to keep our toes nice and toasty in the morning. So I decided that I would split the heat demand for the room between the radiator and the underfloor heating. So armed with the 1.5 kilowatt figure, I started looking for a combination of towel radiators and electric underfloor mats that would provide a combined 1,500 watts. To start with, I found this very nice Radox Hercules towel rad, which was the correct size and the correct colour. And it also offered, if we look down at this table down here, it also offered an output of 852 watts. For the underfloor heating mat, I chose a Pro Warm underfloor heating mat kit, and that had a wattage which was 200 watts per meter squared, and I purchased a kit that was 3 meters squared in total, giving me 600 watts. Adding those together took me very close to my 1,500 watt requirement. Fast forward to the first winter in the house and our bathroom got cold. Very cold. Whilst I do have a temperature sensor in the bathroom recording the temperature all the time, due to a slight IT error in the form of me erasing my entire Home Assistant installation, I don't have any data I can show you from that time period, but from scribblings in notebooks and other notes I'd taken, I recorded that at one point the room did get down to as low as 15 degrees Celsius when it was particularly cold outside, whilst the rest of the house stayed at kind of 19-20. Now, over the past couple of years, I've educated myself quite a lot about heat loss, radiators, boilers and flow temperatures and the like. So I thought it would now be useful to go back through that decision making process and highlight the couple of mistakes that I made in the hope that you can avoid making the same mistakes. Mistake number one was taking the simple demand calculator's value as being accurate. So as we've seen, I got a figure of 1.5 kilowatts from the simple BTU calculator. Good heat loss tools rely on good accurate measurements, and they also rely on accurate U values for the fabric. When I worked out the bathroom's heat loss manually and I confirmed it using a professional tool called Heat Punk, I ended up with a figure of 950 watts. This meant the simple calculator was 50% more than the room actually needed. Let's jump back into the calculator and let's take a look at some of the values that I entered originally. So one of the first things to look at here is the what is below the room question. Now my bathroom is over the garage, but that's not an option for me here. I can only choose whether it's a heated room, a wooden floor or a concrete floor. So technically speaking, my bathroom does have a wooden floor. But in this, I believe this refers to a suspended wooden floor, which means essentially you've got the ground beneath it. Now, I could choose the heated room. My garage technically isn't heated, but it will be warmer than the ground outside. Another question that I can't accurately answer is the select the number of outside walls. Now, whilst my bathroom does technically have 3 external walls, they aren't all the same. So it's closer to having kind of 2.5 external walls, and that's just due to the arrangement of the bathroom versus the hall that lets you in. So I can't pick that, so I'm just going to pick 2. And if I run that calculator again, now we actually get a figure which is closer to my manual calculations and my heat pump calculations. And that means that the original figure I was using was out by about 50%. I'm not having a go at these simple demand calculators, but if you are using one, please take the value it gives you with a very large pinch of salt. Mistake number 2 was taking the radiator's catalogue output at face value. If we jump back to the catalogue data again and we take a look, you can see that the radiator's output is 852 watts, but what you'll notice is the title of the column actually says watts 50 degrees. Now what the watts 50 degrees means is that the radiator will only output its figure, the 852 watts, when the temperature difference between the radiator and the room is 50 degrees. So that means if I want my bathroom at 21 degrees, the radiator has to be at 71 degrees. Typically, this would require my boiler to be running at a flow temperature of 80 degrees with a return temperature of 60 degrees. So essentially you add the two figures together and divide by 2, and that gives you what's called the mean water temperature of the radiator. My plumber set my boiler at 70 degrees and it would have had a return of 50 degrees, meaning a mean water temperature of 60 degrees, which is lower than the required 50. To figure out what the radiator's actual output is at that lower mean water temperature, we have to run a simple conversion on the figures. To help us do the correction, there are plenty of these little calculators online which can do it for us, and all it requires is to input the catalogue output at DT50 and to select a new DT. Now DT stands for delta temperature, so it's the difference in temperature, and as I mentioned, my radiator's mean water temperature would be 60 and I want my room at 21, so that gives me a 39 degree difference between those two temperatures, and we'll call that 40 for simplicity. So we go to our calculator, we feed in the output at DT50, which is 852 watts, and we choose a new DT, which is DT40. Now it's worth bearing in mind that some radiators will give you a figure at DT60, and there are calculators for DT60, so it's just something to bear in mind if you're going through this process. But I'll now run the convert, and you can see now that at DT40 my radiator is only outputting 639 watts, which is 25% less than the catalogue value. And that brings us on to mistake number 3, which was my decision to use the underfloor heating to make up the heat requirement difference. What I failed to account for was that the underfloor heating would have had to be on for as long as the radiator was on in order to keep the room warm. Now at 600 watts, my underfloor heating at current unit prices costs approximately 15p an hour to run. So if I was running that for approximately 10 hours a day, we're talking about £1.50 a day, which would run me to about £50 a month just to keep the underfloor on. And that is a lot of money to just keep one room warm. I also failed to account for the fact that not all the heat from the underfloor heating would be going into the bathroom. With a colder garage beneath, that would have been stealing heat from the underfloor mat. So I basically had a towel radiator that was only putting out 75% of the heat that I thought it was, and I had an underfloor heating mat which I wasn't running all the time and which was having some of its heat stolen by a cold garage. Was it any wonder that my bathroom was cold? So with my mistakes covered, it's now time to talk about what I'm doing to make the room warmer. The first thing I did was to add insulation to the house. I started this process by getting Thermobid cavity wall insulation injected to all the cavity walls in the house. Unfortunately, and I didn't know this until they came to do the survey, the bathroom wall's cavity was too narrow for Thermobid insulation. So whilst they were able to insulate the other 3 main walls of the house, the gable end couldn't be insulated, which meant that one of the bathroom's walls was uninsulated. Unfortunately, I didn't discover this problem with the cavity until after the bathroom was completed. Had I have known that I wouldn't been able to insulate the cavity directly, I would have had insulated plasterboard put up along that wall in the bathroom. Of all the decisions and things that have happened during this renovation, that particular thing is one of the most irritating and frustrating things that happened. As the bathroom is completely renovated and tiled from floor to ceiling, putting insulated plasterboard in now would be a very expensive, disruptive endeavour. So it's not something I'm ever going to be able to correct. That's life, I guess, c'est la vie, and I just have to chalk that down to experience. In addition to the cavity wall insulation in the house, I also upgraded all the loft insulation, and in the case of the bathroom, I actually removed the old original insulation and I put down 300mm of new loft insulation. I also decided, for some insane reason, to insulate the bathroom's floor by essentially insulating the garage ceiling. So I took down all the plasterboard and I added 150mm of rock wool insulation. Hands down, that was the most difficult, arduous piece of DIY I think I've ever done. Damn near broke me mentally and physically, but as you'll see, it was totally worth it. So with all the insulation completed, I reran the heat loss calculations with the updated fabric, and both my manual calculations and heat pump both gave me figures around 500 watts, which means for all the effort, I'd actually halved the heat loss of the room, which was fantastic. Now, for those of you who've been paying close attention to some of the numbers, you'll have spotted that my bathroom should now actually be warm. Tom, you'll say, with all that brilliant hard work you did adding all that insulation and bringing your room's heat loss down to 500 watts, that towel rad with its 640 watt output should now be more than enough to heat the room. And you'd be right, but I don't run my boiler at a flow temperature of 70. During the cold snaps, I can get away with running my boiler at 45. There are a couple of reasons why I run with such a low flow temperature, and I've done a video on that which I'll link to here. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can check it out. Because I'm running with a flow temperature of 45, my boiler is getting a return temperature of 40, and that gives my radiators a mean water temperature of 42.5 on average throughout the house. That means that the DT between the room's temperature and the mean water temperature is more like 20, not 40. If we jump back to the simple converter and we change from 40 down to 20, you can see that the radiator's output is now 256 watts, which is a quarter of its catalogue output and half as much as the room requires. Sure, I could crank my boiler back up to 70, but that would mean that I'd be overheating the rest of the house, which is a silly thing to do for the sake of one room. So with the bathroom as insulated as it's ever going to be, there is one last thing I can do to make the room warmer. Get a bigger radiator. So with size and aesthetics aside, the thing I want to focus on is the output of that radiator. As we've seen, a radiator will put out less heat than its catalogue value when you're running at a lower flow temperature. And as I plan to continue running low flow temperatures, I need to be very careful about the output of the radiator that I pick to replace it. So in a similar way to how we calculated the new output based on the lower flow temperature, we can essentially run that process in reverse. If we jump back to the calculator that I used and scroll down, we come across this little table of correction factors. Now, whilst this table is designed for converting from a catalogue value to an actual output, we can use the correction factors provided to work backwards and take our desired actual output and work backwards to a catalogue output. So with my desired DT of around 20, it gives me a correction factor of 0.3. We will take the 0.3 and invert that value, so that's essentially 1 divided by 0.3, and that's going to give us 3.333333 repeating. I'll bring a little calculator in for this next bit of maths. So we know that we need the 500 watts, so we will take our 500 watts and then we will multiply that figure by our inverted correction factor, which is 3.33333. And if we run that calculation, we get a new figure, which is 1666. So what that means is that to get 500 watts from a radiator at DT20, we need a radiator that will give off 1.6 kilowatts at DT50. It then becomes a simple matter of searching the internet to find a radiator of the right type and color and size that provides 1.6 kilowatts at DT50, like this one here, which I found after a quick Google. And if we scroll down, we'll see down here that our watts at T50 is 1612. So this radiator would be amply sized to deliver 500 watts at DT20. Now I'll have to obviously search for an aesthetically pleasing radiator which is black and has the right width and height to fit into the space. But the important thing now is that I have the right output that I need from that radiator so that it will deliver the required heat with the low flow temperature and keep my bathroom nice and warm. So I'll wrap up there. Hopefully you found the story of my cold bathroom very interesting, and if you did, please press that like button, as that will help the algorithm promote my video to a wider audience. If you're interested in other videos of this kind about heating and smart home tech, please be sure to subscribe. Otherwise, that's it. I'm Tom, and thanks for watching.